Hello and welcome to another episode of Topline Talks, a Mackie Myers podcast hosted by me, Owen Myers.
And me, Jenna Mackey.
As a multi-sector finance recruiter, our aim is to bring inspiring finance and business leaders from across multiple industries to give our listeners fantastic insights into different careers, talent advice, recruitment advice, as well as really good industry insights. Today, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Sasha England, who is the outgoing CFO of Talkwalker, who are a consumer intelligence software business who have recently been bought by Hootsuite, the international market leader in social media marketing. We've got a fantastic conversation lined up about all things private equity, US, UK, sell-side DD, and all that good stuff. So, Sasha, thank you ever so much for your time, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, to kick things off, I appreciate I gave a very top-level overview, but for our listeners, if you could just give us a brief insight as to who you are, a little bit about your background, and I guess what your job is at the moment.
Sure. So, yeah, thanks again for having me. Great to be here. So I'm Sasha. I am the outgoing CFO at a company called Talkwalker. So we are a global tech business headquartered in Luxembourg, and we're an AI-powered social listening platform. And what that means is that we monitor millions of online conversations across different platforms in real time. So this allows our customers to kind of track, mentions, conversations around their brand, product, any emerging trends in their industry, and really, allows them to kind of better understand, brand sentiment, consumer demand, all of these type of things, and kind of better understand really and act on the kind of voice of the consumer, and kind of optimize their marketing and kind of social media strategies. So yeah, as you said, we've recently been acquired by Hootsuite, a Canadian company. They're the kind of leader in social media management, and so yeah, great strategic acquisition, I think, for both sets of customers to bring together two kind of best in class kind of adjacent products. And so I'm currently supporting the initial part of the integration, and then looking forward to having a bit of time off this summer before jumping into something new.
Excellent. So maybe getting drawn in to do stuff over the summer, but do you have any travel plans? Some downtime?
I do, yeah. So we've... my husband and I are doing a road trip in kind of Spain and France. So we're going through some of the kind of wine country in Rioja, nice. The Basque country, kind of San Sebastian, and back up via San Sebastian, Biarritz, and Paris. I'm also going to Albania with my sister, and planning a couple of other trips here and there as well as some weddings in between. Amazing.
Sounds like a great summer. So just to wind back a little bit, how did you end up as CFO of a fast-growing tech business? What was your sort of route into that?
So I started my career at KPMG, so a fairly kind of well-trodden path. I graduated in economics and knew I wanted to go into finance, but wasn't sure exactly which area I wanted to go into. And actually, I think, for me, it was a great first job and some great training, at KPMG, kind of going through the ACA and that program. I think, and I'd definitely recommend that route to anyone who kind of wants to go into finance, but doesn't know exactly, what specific area to go into. I quickly realized, I think, though, that wasn't for me kind of long term. I definitely wanted to move into something a bit more commercial, and was trying to kind of think through what that meant. I actually studied for the CFA, which is the kind of Chartered Financial Analyst qualification, at the end of that accounting program as well, to try and kind of open up some more of those avenues, and then ended up moving into to banking, actually into equity research is my next step. And so I moved to a company called Espírito Santo, a Portuguese bank, which has since been acquired by Haitong Securities. And what I did there is I did equity research, covering the tech tech sector, so kind of across hardware, software. And what that job really entails is basically kind of covering around, 10 to 15 companies in your sector, and advising your clients who are on the buy side. So that's asset managers, that's hedge funds, that's pension funds, whether to kind of buy or sell the stocks. So it was great in terms of kind of building skill sets like modeling and kind of understanding a bit more the kind of commercial side of companies and how they actually operate. But I think what I realized quickly is as part of that job, the thing I like the most is meeting the kind of management teams and, talking to them about their company, what the market trends were, what they were kind of thinking strategically. And I quickly realized I'd like to be on the other side of that table. And then that's how I ended up kind of transitioning into finance in-house, and into my first kind of FP&A role. And from there, kind of going into, FP&A, that's kind of how I've kind of worked my way up, at a series of kind of private equity-backed companies into the CFO role, kind of ultimately.
Just to wind back into the equity research days, I think it's quite an interesting topic. So you graduate, you do the KPMG thing, you do CFA, and then so what? You're, mid to late 20s doing equity research, advising hedge funds whether they should buy or sell their assets in companies. Like, how does that feel? And we're talking about millions, if not billions, of investment.
Yeah, it's quite quite intimidating, I guess. Especially going into it, initially, and also going into, at KPMG I covered, and I think the kind of beauty of those type of roles is you cover a variety of sectors, right? And then you go from doing that to being very specialized in a sector and actually speaking to people on the buy side who have spent their whole careers in a specific sector and looking at kind of tech stocks. So yeah, slightly out of my depth at times, but I think you kind of quickly get up to speed, and if you really invest time, you kind of quickly get up to speed on kind of what's going on in the industry, and those trends, etc. But it was quite a jump from what I was doing at KPMG. That's for sure.
And then, so how did you get from? So, was your first role in North Sales and Industry?
Yes, it was. It was kind of North Technology Group, which is a marine kind of group of companies, and North Sales was the biggest part of that. So kind of making sales for yachts. So kind of everything from the kind of America's Cup yachts down to kind of more, smaller kind of club sailing yachts. But there was also a few other divisions that were kind of brought together under one umbrella, from an acquisition by Oakley Capital. So there was a division that made rigging, an apparel division, and a kind of water sports division as well. So yeah.
Are you into your sailing?
No, actually, it was quite. It was quite a random industry to kind of go into, but like actually really fascinating. And so I did actually learn a bit more about sailing throughout the kind of 5 years I was there. But yeah, definitely still not an expert, but like amazing to watch the experts.
Yeah, very cool. And then you moved into tech.
Then I moved into tech. So yeah, so I worked at North Technology Group for kind of 5 years. Firstly in London, and then I actually moved out to the US with them. And I worked for the US business for around a year, but I probably hadn't, when I moved over, my husband also got a job in New York, and we were living in Manhattan. I was commuting out to Connecticut where the office was. Hadn't really kind of thought through that in a lot of detail, and realized it was like a 2.5 hour kind of door-to-door commute. This was kind of pre-COVID and remote working. So I kind of I started looking for roles in Manhattan, and that's when I joined Yipper Data, which is a tech company based in Manhattan at that point. So really a kind of interesting opportunity. I came in at around, company was around 100 people, around kind of 30 million in revenue, really with a remit to kind of build up an FP&A function and business intelligence function from scratch. And I kind of stayed there for 3 years. It was a real growth story. Like what the company does is it's an alternative data provider. So kind of either creates via kind of data scientists and kind of web scraping, or licenses in a ton of alternative data, really cleans that, packages it up, and kind of sells that on to its end customers, who are both investors and corporates. And it was a real growth story. And actually, I think the move towards alternative data was kind of accelerated by COVID at the time as well. So yeah, kind of joined at around 100 people, 30 million of revenue, left 3 years later when we were 600 people, 125 million of revenue. So, really interesting journey, kind of building up that team and building up that function in the context of all that growth, and kind of making sure we built out structures that kind of could support that kind of rapidly changing business.
Wow.
I mean, that sounds intense and fascinating. But more broadly, I was really keen to get onto the topic of US versus UK. So obviously, that sounds like a job in itself. But how would you summarize the difference? So from having most of your career in the UK to then going out there, how would you sort of summarize the difference between, I guess, working cultures, attitudes, both from a personal employee point of view, but then also from an employer point of view, trying to build a team and get people in?
I'd say, I've loved working in both, the UK, but also in Europe, kind of more widely, and also the US. I think there's a lot of similarities, probably more similarities than there are differences. I would say the one difference is probably the kind of work culture, which is definitely more intense, I'd say, in the US, just in terms of how much holiday people take, etc. So I'd say that was the biggest difference I saw, certainly. The tech companies in the US are a lot more progressive. We had, for example, unlimited PTO, which a lot of companies don't have. You still have kind of the legacy companies in the US who have kind of the 10 days of holiday a year, which is crazy to me. But I think that was the biggest difference I saw. But I think there were actually just a lot more similarities than differences in general.
So obviously in the US, properly in the tech industry by this point now at Yipty.
Yipit data. Yeah,
Yipit data. Get that
bit of a mouthful.
And how did you find working in tech? Because I would say going into a sailing company and the tech industry are both quite male-dominated industries in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just finance in general is as well. So look, I really enjoyed both of them. I actually loved going into tech, I think. And I think when I moved into tech, I think I realized that that's probably the industry I wanted to stay in. And I think the reason for that is everyone is very, what I found anyway in my experience, is everyone's very open-minded. Everyone's really keen to kind of build something together and work together kind of really collaboratively. And it's pretty kind of forward-thinking. Still is very male-dominated though. And I think, yeah, that definitely is a challenge. Like one of the things I did at Yipidata, along with a few other women, is set up a women's ERG, so Women's Employee Resource Group, which was actually one of the highlights of my time there, because it meant, we met once a month or whatever that frequency was, and kind of could share stories and insights and everything about kind of being, a woman in a pretty male-dominated workplace. And I think I've been really lucky for my whole career that I've worked with amazing people, that I've never, definitely never kind of felt any kind of discrimination. But I think what I have felt, and I think what a lot of other women, talking to them in industries that are a bit more male-dominated do feel, is it's kind of representation. It's like if you don't see anyone in your image kind of in those leadership positions, it's kind of hard to picture yourself in there. So I think that's certainly been really key for me. So I think I've been really lucky to work for my whole career for men who have really championed me and, really encouraged me to kind of step up. But I think actually for me personally, it was my first time working for a female CFO that really was that kind of moment that made me think, well, I can do this as well, which is kind of stupid in some ways, but I think it is a real, it's a real kind of mental thing, seeing someone more in your image kind of in that role.
Well, that's the power of representation, isn't it? That's why people want a diverse workforce, because you don't realise the impact it has until you see the other side of the coin, isn't it? So what would your advice be to other women who don't have that representation of someone more senior than them to kind of follow in their footsteps? What do you think they can do?
Well, I think even if you don't have someone more senior in the company you're currently at, I'd say you can look for that elsewhere. It doesn't need to be someone in a leadership role in your company. Like ideally it would be, and ideally we're getting there. But I think one thing that I found really, really valuable on kind of both sides of this actually is kind of looking for mentors outside of work. And I've recently started to do a bit of mentoring myself. And I think for me, that's just been a really impactful thing to do. But also, I think it's almost helpful to, even if you have people in your workplace who you can kind of look up to, I think having that outside perspective of someone outside of your kind of day-to-day is just really helpful as a sounding board, kind of regardless of gender, regardless of anything. Anyway, so I think, looking more broadly, if you don't have that, right there and available to you. And I'd say also just kind of having, it's easy to say and hard to do, but I think kind of having that confidence kind of in yourself as well. Male manager said to me once that I hadn't even realised I was doing. I think we came out of a meeting and he said, why do you qualify things you say like that? And I think I asked for an example and he said, you went into the meeting, you were leading the meeting, you walked through the agenda, and then you said, is this okay with everyone? And he said, why did you say that? Of course it's okay with everyone. You're leading the meeting. People will shout if it's not. Don't. And I think as women, there's a lot of things we do that we don't necessarily, we kind of subconsciously do and don't necessarily realise until some people pick it up. So I've tried to be a lot more conscious after that point of how you kind of present yourself. And
I guess the other side as well, I mean, you're in finance, you're also in technology, but you're also in private equity. You've got the triple whammy. And private equity is generally known as being quite a male-dominated environment as well. I guess what are the challenges of that you've found? And I guess it'd be interesting to get some insight as what the reality of working in private equity-backed businesses means as a CFO as well.
Sure. So, I mean, I don't have a great comparative because I've basically, since I've gone into industry, I've worked in private equity my whole career. And I really enjoyed it because I think it is always, it's always quite fast-paced because, most private equity firms have a kind of investment horizon of 3 to 5 years. So, and they're trying to drive value and, create value in that time. So it's always pretty fast-paced, which I've really enjoyed and has been pretty motivating to me. It definitely is intense sometimes, and there's also the exit process as part of that, and that's going to come up. When you work in private equity-backed business, you're going to go through kind of some of these, some of these exit processes, which we can kind of talk about in more detail. But it definitely is kind of intense. And I think another piece of advice I was given that was really great is never hold back bad news. It's always going to end up, badly if you do that. I was given that advice and also kind of similar advice by an old, CFO, a CEO I used to work with, which was kind of, run into the fear. And I think that's been really, really great advice for me because I think whatever you have, if, cash flow isn't where you want it to be, if you're forecasting a budget miss next quarter, I think getting up front and communicating that problem, thinking it through and communicating it in a constructive way, obviously, but communicating that up front, I always think is, and whether that's to the private equity investors, whether that's to a bank, whether that's to, your manager internally, it's always going to be a better option than kind of sitting on that and waiting until things blow up. And what I found is when you do that, actually, you can work together really collaboratively to like problem solve and say, okay, well, this is the situation, how are we going to fix this together? And I think that's been the best advice is kind of I was given around that, and it's kind of served.
I would say that's good career advice in general, no matter what job you do. I mean, we have it in our business quite a lot. It's quite fast paced, problems arise all the time. And actually, if there's not a collaborative, sort of communicative dialogue, sometimes the problem's already passed and you can't help resolve it. Whereas if actually people are communicating it early, you can have that collaboration and try and fix something before it gets out of hand. The other rule we have in our business is no bad news Friday afternoons. 4 p.m. onwards, which I think is generally a good life skill. Obviously, there are exceptions. Okay, so let's talk about selling.
Yes.
So can you just talk us through the cycle? So you as a CFO, okay, we've got a horizon, that we're trying to work towards. At what point is it, okay, let's make this happen? And then how does that work to completion?
Yeah, so I think it's a probably kind of collaboration between the company and the investors ultimately in terms of when that time is right to sell, and it depends on a ton of factors, including the market, including kind of where you are in that deal cycle. The typical cycle, I guess, for most investors is 3 to 5 years, and then also kind of organic interest kind of popping up and someone saying, "Oh, can we have a conversation here?" The way I've seen it generally work is having in mind a kind of rough timeline or kind of goal, and then being flexible, kind of to a window around that. And I think kind of having, I think there's a lot of ways you can kind of get ahead of that and prepare in the lead up as well, which are always incredibly, you always really thank yourself if you do that. And I've definitely been in a position where I haven't done that as much as I should have done and regretted it as well. So I think just making sure in that lead up, whether that's kind of a year or year and a half, pre that kind of exit timeline, that you're kind of exit ready. And what that means, I think just from a finance perspective, is just having really clean reporting. Having in a SaaS business a kind of an ARRQ, very clean reporting that you can easily pull. And there are a lot of tools you can use to pull data, for example, straight from NetSuite. So your reporting can be refreshed instantly, etc. Just making sure you fully understand kind of business, the business trends, everything going on in the business. So I think there's a lot you can do to kind of prepare in that lead up to an exit. And then when the process actually starts, you're in pretty good shape at that point. But I'd say in terms of the process, the actual process of selling, it's normally when there's a kind of decision that's made. If you're going to involve third parties, if you're going to involve a banker, then you kind of have those initial conversations with them, and everything moves pretty fast at that point in terms of building a model, getting that data room kind of all ready and set up. Working out what your strategy is. Are you going to try and kind of sell to another sponsor, another private equity firm, or sell to a strategic acquirer? And then getting those initial meetings kind of set up and all lined up from that point. So I think from that point you kind of press go. That's when it starts to move like very, very fast. So I think being as prepared as you can before that point is really key.
And obviously the last 18 months, 2 years has not been amazing for the tech sector, generally speaking. So you've obviously been doing that whilst that's been going on. What impact has that had through the process?
Look, I think there has been a big change in the tech sector. I think until, I guess, late 2021, the focus was a lot on kind of growth at all costs in a lot of businesses. There was cheap debt, there was, relatively easy fundraising. And there's been a real switch towards kind of looking at profitability, but also looking at not away from growth, but looking towards kind of sustainable growth and kind of sensible growth.
And what's the reality being a CFO in a business going through a sale?
And so what I'd say upfront is what really benefited me, I think, is going through that first as a number two and getting that experience. And I think that's been really invaluable to me. So at Yipip, we went through a Series E where we went through a fundraising and Carlisle came in. And I went through that working for a CFO who was really experienced and had been through that before. And I think if you can, trying to get experience in kind of that number two role before you go into it for the first time as a CFO is really, really important. But I think the reality of what that looks like, it's an intense process. Like there's no denying it. And I think it, and things move fast from that time. And if you're doing a kind of full process where you get an investment bank involved, things move very fast between the point you kind of kick that off and ultimately when you close the deal. And so the hours, yes, can be really intense for sure. So I think what's really important is having a great team around you that, you trust, because you can't do everything yourself. As a CFO, you're often probably project managing the acquisition as well as doing a lot of the finance work yourself. So I think having a kind of team around you that you can really trust to help you, and also you're working long hours that you kind of want to spend time with, and you can still find humor when you're kind of up until midnight trying to get some fix the financial model or whatever is really key.
And how long has it been from hit and go that, you know, we are selling this business through to completion? How long did that take you at Talkwalker?
Late last year to late March, and then it takes a couple of months, you know, additional to complete. So fairly short process, I guess, kind of
3 months basically, plus a bit of completion at the end.
So fairly intense, but I think always good to kind of move fast. It doesn't always feel like that at the time when you're kind of in the trenches, but I think looking back, it's good to get this done, because it can be a real distraction, I think, to running the day-to-day business. So it's kind of difficult to manage those two things at once sometimes.
We referenced it in the intro, so you're now the outgoing CFO. What's that been like, from going through this really intense thing to then, you know, in essence, okay, you know, your job is done?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, because I've been through two exits now, and one was to another private equity firm. So we did at Ep7, we did our Series E. Carlyle came in as an investor, but actually nothing much changed kind of day to day, because you know, some things did obviously, but a lot of the day to day stayed the same. But it's a very different scenario when you go through a sale to a strategic acquisition, where, you know, things absolutely change day to day, and a lot of the focus is on integration. And even actually before that signing point, the focus is on kind of integration as well as diligence. So you're trying to manage those two things and kind of get ahead with the integration planning, as well as kind of going through that diligence process. So it's been really interesting. I think executing on integration well is really, really key. And I've seen it from both sides when I've been in businesses that acquire companies as well, because I think there's a lot of challenges that can come up. So I think being really thoughtful about it and kind of over communicating in these scenarios, especially when there's people involved, and people that may be uncertain about what their business looks like, what does their role look like, etc., I think is really key.
Given we're recording this a few weeks out from the general election, one could argue that it sounds not too dissimilar in concept to running an election campaign whilst at the same time planning for government. You know, I don't even know where they begin to start with that as like a concept. So you're doing the sell side DD whilst also looking at integration. That's you know, quite a complicated thing to get right?
Yeah, I think it's a great analogy. Actually, I hadn't even thought about that, but I think it's hard to balance the two for sure, because you absolutely want to get the DD done and just finish so you can kind of get on with it, but also you want to at the same time have a really great plan for integration. So on day one, everyone actually knows what they're doing. Everyone knows what the communication plan is, rather than it just being a bit of a shock and saying, okay, we've done this, what do we do now? So I think getting that balance and kind of getting that focus on making sure there's focus on both is really key. And I think that's the key differentiator between a kind of strategic acquisition to a kind of an acquisition by a sponsor or another private equity firm.
And so you're off to pastures new, I understand, later on in the year. So I don't know if there's much you can tell us about that yet, or...
Yeah, still in kind of, you know, final discussions, but so I can't share too much, but really, really excited about jumping into a new opportunity after taking a little bit of a breather and a pause. But no, in discussions, I'm planning to stay in the tech sector, in you know, another SaaS company, company seems that I'm hopefully going to end up at. Really great product, and I think really, from what I've seen so far, really, really great team. So, and I think those two, that's for me like one of the absolute key things. So, very excited.
Which it should be great as long as you don't get lost to the Bordeaux vineyards or something on your road trip. Actually, I'm going to become a wine investor.
Yeah, God forbid.
Yes, I'm very excited about that trip, but hopefully I'll come back in one piece.
Just to close a little bit on, I guess, your experiences of more talent-related themes, because obviously on a number of occasions you've had to build teams, improve teams, kind of etc. If people are looking at either tech and or private equity-backed industries as a potential route for their career, what's the main bit of advice you might give someone as to how they can stand out and succeed in those environments?
I'm very much of the view that it's not kind of necessarily experience that counts. It's not, what you've done. It's kind of the ambition and the curiosity. And I think, especially in finance, you kind of need that curiosity and you need that the flexibility as well. Because I think both working in private equity, but also in tech, I think it can be a very fast changing environment, and you need to be the type of person that is willing to come in, get your hands kind of dirty, work on various things, and then easily adapt. And so I think in any of the jobs I've had, what I thought when I come in on a Monday and think I'm going to do for the week has never ended up being what I've actually done for the week. And so I think being excited and being motivated by that rather than kind of scared off by that is really key. And I'd say just get in and just try and prove yourself, kind of work. Don't be afraid to kind of jump in to kind of various different tasks or different areas, even if it's not directly with your team or with your role. I think in these type of businesses, it's kind of an all hands on deck approach, and people really appreciate when you kind of proactively volunteer to do something that doesn't sit within your day-to-day scope.
That's a really good theme, actually, because we the majority of the recruiting we do is with small, medium-sized, growing organizations. And when we're vetting people, that's sort of trait is a big thing we look out for. It's simultaneously being able to get into the weeds as well as step up and present big picture, which is quite a unique skill set, particularly if someone's worked in a big corporate where it's very much siloed working and everyone working in their boxes, and that concept of being able to do anything, right? So have you seen it not work where people haven't been willing to give stuff a go?
Yeah, and I think I have, and I think the shock is when people have come from big businesses and then expect to do pretty, what exactly what their job spec said. I think that's when it probably doesn't work out, and you don't, and you aren't kind of open-minded enough to do something else. And I think actually for me, the biggest learnings have come from not sitting in my role and kind of being in Excel, but actually from working kind of cross-functionally, working with a product team and really learning what that product development kind of life cycle looks like, or working with the sales team and kind of learning about the go-to-market motion and why does this work, why doesn't that work. And I think as people in finance, I think that really, that experience and not just sitting kind of in a siloed kind of finance function is what's key, and that's how you're going to progress faster in a finance role if you kind of understand the business kind of holistically. So
running into the fear.
Just
keep running into the fear and you'll be fine. Well, look, that brings us on to our top line quiz. We may have mentioned at the start of this, We do a little quiz with all of our guests. You'll be happy to know there are no right or wrong answers. So it's just short, quick fire questions. So are you ready for our top line quiz? Question number 1, when hiring, would you look at qualification or experience?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say, I'd say experience.
Okay. Communication or skill set?
Communication.
In office or remote?
Can I say hybrid?
You can.
Because I think it's important to make those in-person connections, but I think once you've done that, then I think it's
flexibility is fine.
Flexibility is good.
Ownership structure or sector?
I'd say ownership structure.
Side question, just because I'm interested. Better place to work, America or England?
Oh, that's a tough one. I guess I've got to stick with the UK, but no, I loved both.
100%. And then part 2, I think this is just a really interesting question for other businesses. I think given you've been in quite a male-dominated environment, I think if, in your experience, if there is one thing that a business can do to help promote more kind of female leadership within an organisation, what do you think that one thing is that they could implement?
I think I think firstly, try and have a leadership team that is more representative of than a kind of all male leadership team. But in terms of like an initiative itself, I think one thing I'd say is mentorship. And we spoke about this kind of before, but like kind of in the context of kind of outside of work. But one thing we did at Yepa Data is we implemented a mentorship scheme for women, and it wasn't always it wasn't actually that the mentors were exclusively female either. It was actually the mentors were both male and female. And actually what was really encouraging is a lot of the exec team signed up, proactively kind of signed up to be part of this.
Amazing.
And I think just having, and I think that was something that everyone found really, really valuable. We had meetings every month, and I think every other month we invited allies and men to kind of come to those meetings as well. So it wasn't just women talking with women about women's experiences in the workplace. It was women talking to the broader company and men who actually, a lot of them just said, "Oh, I had no idea that you had kind of been through this, or you thought this." It was just really eye-opening, I think, and I think both women and men got a lot out of that.
Yeah. I think that's great advice, because a lot of people in leadership teams don't already have women at the top. So actually there's no point in women just talking to women. It's actually about opening the conversation to everybody so that you can improve things. Excellent. Well, that's our top line quiz. So it's all over.
Great.
We do like to finish with one last and final question to all of our guests. Now, there is, there's no lead into where this answer goes, but like, is there anybody that you would like to see on our podcast? And it can be someone who you've worked with previously. It could be someone in the tech sector. It could be someone in the private equity sector that you think would be a really good guest. We'd love to have your thoughts. Yeah.
Well, I guess on that topic, I'd say just more women in general. But there's been some like really impressive women I personally work with in finance. So Emma, who is my previous CFO, who's now working for a company called Medius, CFO there. Suki Huang, who I hired at Yepa Data. She's director of FP&A at Yepa Data, and one of the best hires I made. She's really incredibly impressive at kind of working collaboratively across across functions, across businesses, which I think is one thing we discussed. Claudia Bates, who leads operations out in Berlin at a company called N8, a really impressive female leader, but covering the kind of whole of operations, but kind of finance within that as well. So
great.
More women.
More women.
Well, I have to say, we've done 8 of these. I think we've only had 2 males, actually. So we're definitely flying the flag, I think. So.
I love that.
Well, look, that's everything. That's a wrap for this episode. So thank you very much, Sasha. It's been amazing. I feel like we've covered so much, like women leadership. We've covered private equity, relocating to the US. So I imagine quite valuable for a lot of our listeners. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks for having me on.
Great. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please do hit subscribe. We are on Spotify, Apple and YouTube. Otherwise, for now, that's been Topline Talks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much.